America, it's the land of opportunity, and for a lot of us, it's drilled into us that if we work hard, we'll prosper. But in a new book called The Good Enough Job, author Simone Stolzoff suggests that Americans have a way more complicated relationship with their jobs than they realize. For millions of Americans, work has come to fill the role of belonging, purpose, identity. Things that once were filled by religion or faith or other forms of community. How did work become so elemental in our identities in America?
I do think it's a uniquely American affliction. I think most of it is what you just named, which is the decline of all of these other sources of belonging and community and purpose in our lives. And then many Americans turn to where they spent the majority of their time, which is the office or the workplace.
And you know what's interesting to me is when I speak with friends of mine who live in other countries or who were raised in other countries, it's not so much what do you do? That's not so important. Someone would be, I've been a waitress my entire life, and it's a profession that I find highly regarded. It's not like, oh, you have to be a CEO, right?
Yeah, I think I am Italian American, and I can definitely see that kind of cross-cultural comparison. So my family in Italy, not only do they not talk about work so centrally to who they are, but they also don't orient their days so much around the workplace. There's what's called riposo, which is like a break in the afternoon for people to take care of their non-work priorities. It's a different sort of cultural prioritization and value system.
And I'm here for that. Your title of your book includes Good Enough Job. What is a good enough job, and how should we diversify our identities and sources of meaning in our personal lives?
Yeah, so the good enough job has sort of two origins. The first is a foil to the dream job. So I am a millennial, kind of smack dab in the middle of the millennial generation. I think we were raised under certain scripts about what we should be pursuing through our professional lives, finding a job that is not just a paycheck, but a means of self-actualization. And the second origin is an allusion to this theory that was devised by this British pediatrician named Donald Winnicott. And Winnicott was observing how there was this growing idolization of parenting in England in sort of the mid-20th century. And he felt that instead of valuing perfection, parents would actually be better off valuing sufficiency because they were trying to shield their kids from experiencing any sort of negative emotion. And then when the kid inevitably felt frustrated or sad or angry, the parent took it extremely personally. And so Winnicott's idea is very in direct parallel to this idea that I talk about in the book, which is, much like a crying toddler, a job is not always something that is in your control. And perhaps thinking about a job as a way to support your life rather than the other way around will actually be more fulfilled and happy.
Okay, I'm here for, that's a really good point. None of us, and I'm a Zennial, I'm kind of in the mix there, but none of us were taught that. You were taught that your job had to be something of value. We were taught that it wasn't sustaining your life, it was your life. So what are some ways, actual concrete ways we can diversify our identity beyond work if we have to retrain ourselves like some of us do?
Yeah, I think that's a great phase. And I think a lot of us have learned about the risks of not having a diverse identity in the past few years. Some people were laid off. If your job is your identity and you lose your job, what's left? But for other people, it was just a very high expectation. I like thinking about happiness as sort of the difference between expectations and our reality. And when we're always expecting our jobs to be a dream, it leaves a lot of room for disappointment. So the advice I often give people is, it's pretty simple, but 2 steps. The first is to carve out space for non-work. One of the problems with our work-centric existence is that work doesn't just take our best hours, but our best energy too. And if you want to cultivate different sides of yourself or different sources of meaning, you need to do things other than work. And that way identities are sort of like plants. They need to be watered with our attention and our time in order to grow. And so carving out space to fill with non-work pursuits, whether it's investments in your local community or your relationships or your hobbies or your other interests, those are the things that can balance out a more work-centric existence.
How important is it that we redefine and reframe how work exists in our lives for the greater happiness of all?
Yeah, so I think kind of the status quo is you treat jobs as the central axis around which the rest of your life orbits. And I advocate for an alternative, which is we should start with our vision of what a life well lived looks like, and then think about how our careers can support that vision. Because too often, the psychologist Esther Perel has this great phrase that too many people bring the best of themselves to work and bring the leftovers home. And so in my mind, we need to balance the scales. And, with the book, The Good Enough Job, the idea is to think about how your job can support your life.
So many great ideas in this book.